Hi everyone, I haven't posted any videos lately, so I thought I'd do one about jobs and my experience of obtaining and starting them. I thought I'd talk about this because often when I start a job, it turns into something completely different from the way it was presented to me in the job description. And often that means the journey into that job and also what you end up doing is quite different from what you expected. So I thought I'd talk about it because I have changed jobs a reasonable number of times in my career for various reasons. And really, the thing that I have learned over the course of that time is that the more honest the company can be with me about what the job entails, what I actually need to do, what their real challenges are, the better it works out for everyone. I think in some cases, though, what happens is, particularly when a new role is developed and kind of advertised, the vision of what's needed is slightly different from what is actually needed. And that boils down to the fact that when you recruit a new role, that person has often got a different set of skills, expertise, and experience. That's the reason why you recruit them. They may have a different set of experience to you. And so when they arrive in the job and look at the landscape in front of them and meet all the people, actually what they perceive as an individual with that experience and that expertise is something very different to perhaps how the manager or the people reporting to them would have perceived it. And that means that the job manifests in a very different way to the way that the appointee, if you like, has envisioned based on the description, but also the manager or recruiter might have envisioned for that role. And so I've started probably 3 or 4 different roles during my career, which have been brand new roles. Nobody else has had them. I haven't got a legacy from someone else. And so walking into the company on the first day, you'll obviously look at the job description, you'll obviously think about the objectives that have been set at induction. But sometimes the way that job manifests is very different from the way you might have seen when you first started kind of compiling what you might do in that role, perhaps before you even start with the company. So what I've found is that normally the best way to start a new job is really to use the first 3 weeks as a kind of survey of the culture of the organization, the priorities that you might be facing, the kind of people, the expertise, maybe the training needs and the resources that they do or don't have, and kind of assess that really across the board. And then to write a report on your initial observations in that role and let's say the first steps that you envision for the delivery of that role is really important for communication. So obviously when you start a job and you receive a job description, some managers, bosses, leaders will assume that that job will manifest in the way that they first perceived it. But maybe what they haven't done is stepped into your shoes and seen the company as you see it. That's why we recruit fresh blood. We want a fresh vision of our organization. We want a fresh vision of how something can be solved, how a problem can be solved, or how a project could be delivered. So really, in that initial assessment period, the recruiter and the manager, the direct line manager of that report should be open to adapting what that job may manifest into being, given the expertise, unless, of course, the leader has exactly the same expertise as a new appointee. Who knows? But it's rare that someone fits a job description exactly. So often it's an 80% match and they bring 20% of additional skills or unexpected skills to that role. And that may well result in a sort of different plan to the one you'd wanted. And for most leaders, they recruit someone because they want someone who's a specialist in the area, someone who's going to add to the company, someone who's going to add value to that company. And so really, when I've been to managers, bosses, etc., with my observations for the first 3 weeks, I wouldn't expect them to be surprised if it was different from what they thought the job was going to manifest in being. However, in the current performance review structures and the way companies are often run, it's actually very, very difficult to step outside the brief. It can be very, very difficult to question something and, sit outside what the expected manifestation of that role is likely to be. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, you could actually be wrong in the way you've assessed this job. I'm not going to say it that directly necessarily, but ultimately, there may be questions that I would ask that no one else has asked. And as a result of asking those questions, as a result of talking to the people on the floor, as well as the leaders, managers, middle management, I may have kind of interpreted all that information in a different way to which other people have interpreted it. Because I tend to, when I start a job, look 360 at any position. I tend to talk to people on the ground who are delivering the project in a sort of detailed way, as well as the leaders and, you know, how they perceive the vision for the company, the aims of the company, the responsibilities throughout the organization and what's required. And often what you find is when you talk to a senior leader and then you talk to someone on the ground who's, say, a customer service person or a project delivery support person, those people on the ground perceive what is going on and face different challenges to the ones that the leaders have perceived. And obviously then as a person stepping into a new role, your job is to bring those two people back into alignment and say, to this person, do you understand this is what's happening down here? And to this person, do you understand that actually the vision for this company is slightly different to the way you're delivering it? And often there's a disconnect between those two people. It's not always because there's any deliberate sort of divide or segregation. It's not always because the company works in silos. Often it's just simply because people at each level have made assumptions about what their leaders, what their middle managers, what their project delivery people are doing and how they're doing it. They may also be assuming what challenges, how easy it is for that person to do their job or how hard it is for them to do their job without actually validating that assumption and questioning the person who's really doing it. It may just be time and motion. So it could just be that, you haven't passed by that person's desk this week. And during the coronavirus, obviously everyone's been working from home. So that kind of passing by communication, that conversation which would have happened in the office has not been happening. And so as a result, people may be afraid to speak out if their job is going wrong, or they think they have a question or a concern, or the project's going to be late, for example. They may be afraid of voicing that to their managers and leaders. And equally, the managers and leaders may not be elucidating what they actually want specifically from that project. They may have assumed that their perception of what's going to be delivered is the same as the person who is project managing that or the person who's administrating underneath. So when I look at a new job, I try to look at it from a holistic point of view, try to talk to people around the business and try to distill those views for both the people who are paying me effectively and the people who are sort of working on the ground delivering anything that I might define for them. Since I've been working as a consultant, I've found that I do that way faster from the outside than I would internally. I've found that it's much easier to voice a concern, question someone, or state, a vision of something which is unexpected. I think within a company culture, often there are levels of discouragement, if you like. People fear their job security. People fear looking stupid. People fear asking the question that no one else is asking, when actually everyone else might be thinking exactly the same thing. So as a result, it's actually easier to be an outsider walking in than it is to be an insider questioning the status quo. And I've done that in quite a few companies, question the status quo. And I feel that whenever I take on a job, whether it's a consultancy role or a permanent job, it's my responsibility to tell the truth in that role, to tell the truth of what I perceive and the concerns I would have. Because actually, what's the point in working if you don't voice your truth? What's the point in being employed with your expertise and experience if you don't voice your truth? And it's a very difficult thing to do in some circumstances. It's extremely difficult if you work in a very political, ego-centered kind of company. It's much easier if there's flexibility, openness to discussion. And that's often led by the leaders being willing to show their lack of knowledge or a mistake that they've made, for example. And that opens up to the floor for other people to question what's going on, to voice concern, to look at solutions for problems that are arising and actually voice those problems. So in some situations, I've found that problems aren't voiced simply because people are afraid of voicing them. They're maybe afraid for their job security. But equally, they may have been told not to voice problems. And this is a really interesting manifestation of kind of how operations fall over, really. So if people are told that their problems and the problems they face within their job or in their personal life actually haven't got room or space to be heard, then what that means in an operational environment is that problems are not voiced, therefore they're not addressed. And if problems in an operational environment are not addressed, then that operational process is unlikely to succeed. Because in an operational environment, often it's the incremental improvements, the incremental change, the little discussion on the side that just sort of irons out some kind of delivery issue, a timing issue, or maybe an import-export issue, that if it's not done, that package gets stuck in customs for however long. So in the customer service environments I've worked in, the technology environments I've worked in, the best technologists and the best operational warehouse delivery customer service people are always those that say, oh, I'm really sorry to bother you, but I've just found this thing and it looks a bit like that problem we had last week. And it's happening over and over again. It's a very small thing, but actually we do need to address it because it's happening every week and it may be consuming more time. It may be creating a situation where the customer doesn't get their goods on time, for example. It may be creating a situation where, there's a disconnect or an argument between different stakeholders within that environment. And if that incremental thing is addressed and looked at as an overarching problem, something that ITIL defines basically, which is a IT technology delivery kind of project methodology. In ITIL, you look at the incident of a particular problem. You then look at any common ground between incidents, and that's called problem management, whereas incident management is one-off. And then above the problem management, there's something called issue management. So like a huge category, like, I don't know, security, say, is in, and there's a major problem underneath that privacy is not respected. The accesses and permissions aren't quite right or something. So the incident is that somebody's got into something they shouldn't have done. The problem is that that's happening every week. And the overarching issue is security, access and permissions. So in all the jobs that I have moved into and experienced and all the training I've done, which ranges from Six Sigma through to Prince 2, through to Agile methodology, through to ITIL, all of those methodologies depend on people voicing the problems or the issues they face. It depends on people offering solutions for those problems and being positive about the fact that those problems can be resolved and something can be put in place, and something can be put in place in time. And I think that's really important, especially in something like a technology project or somewhere where you're delivering goods to people or servicing conferences and making sure all the stands get there on time. So the best operational environments I've worked in my life are the ones that aren't noticed. So if an operational environment or technology project is flowing well, if it's going well and people are working well together, there's no real issue, there's no complaint, there's no rumblings of dissent, because every problem is raised, addressed and resolved. Whereas in an operational environment which isn't going right, there's something else happening and everybody sees it if it's not going right. So you'll see a culture of dissent arising where perhaps teams see they're better than the people sitting next to them, or that this project went really well because so-and-so was leading it, but this project went really badly because a different person was leading it, even though their styles are the same and the methodology is the same. So what's the difference between those two projects within a company where perhaps you implement Agile methodology for projects and then like a process Lean Six Sigma approach? So what's the difference if you've got those methodologies in place in the company? It's actually the person leading them. So if the person leading that project isn't open to others voicing problems, issues, and potential solutions, then ultimately things start to fracture and things start to fall apart, and the project may not be delivered on time. And the people within that project may get very frustrated. And actually, if they're reporting into somebody who's routinely not listening to problems, often people leave in that situation because they just feel their voice isn't heard, that they have no impact what they're doing, and also the things that they're doing actually fail or are stressful or are, fractious between people. So I just wanted to talk really about the kind of jobs that I've had, how I've approached them, the kind of approach I take in a project management situation or a leadership situation. And essentially, my main aim in any organisation, particularly in the first month, is to listen, to distill, and to report back, and then to come up with a plan of what happens immediately, what happens in the interim, what happens ultimately long term when you move to business as usual. So I hope it's been interesting. This wasn't a very planned talk, so I look forward to hearing any feedback that you have.